What's going on, everybody? It's Q from Retro Q Gaming here, and well, here it is, the 54th episode of our Quack experimental podcast. You might notice that, well, after a little snafu and jerry-rigging of the situation last week, it turns out it gave us a better lighting look at the end of the day. It's exceptionally hard for me to get good lighting done correctly, simply because, being Irish, I am so very, very pale. Very, very pale. But we found out through sheer accident, sheer happenstance, that this might be a better way to do things from now on. So yes, despite it not being the middle of the night this time, we will still go ahead with a nice midnight Q after dark, if you will. But that's beside the point. Now, you may notice, before we get into these topics here today, I am in a little bit of a more jovial mood than usual. Now, of course, I'm always a happy-go-lucky, charismatic, good-looking stallion of an individual, as everyone always knows, not to mention a great gamer. But, well, I saw something just before I started this that really tickled me in a way that if someone else in question had tickled me, I'd say, ooh yeah, that is nice, more of that. Hee hee ho ho ho, ha ha ha. But yeah, I have been. Let me give you a little bit of a backstory to this one, if you would indulge me so. Now, naturally, everyone here knows I am logical. I know what I'm talking about from a technical standpoint, and I frequently clown fanboys, being whatever type of fanboys they are. Console fanboys, hardware fanboys, controller fanboys, 30 frames per second fanboys, Wii U fanboys. That's right, there's even a Wii U fanboy out there. But no matter what it is, I can always clown them because I know what's up. So when someone told me today that a mouse, a gaming mouse, or even probably just a mouse in general, in a first-person shooter on a PC is inferior to a controller. And, I mean, that's funny enough within itself, but it gets better. I've heard a new one. This is new. This is new bottom of the barrel, but I've been laughing about this for about half an hour. Excuse me. It's a good thing I'm wearing these because my eyes are just red at this point from laughing so hard. But I've been informed by plebeians out there, that's too good a word for these people, but I have been informed that you cannot do a 360 degree turn on a mouse in a first person shooter in one go. Apparently you need to turn a quarter, pick your mouse up, bring it back over, drop it down again, and do another quarter turn, and then do it again and again and again to finally make the whole 360. How do these people... how do these people function? It's... oh my god, it's... it's just so bad. It's so bad. But anyway, you may see me burst into fits of laughter randomly, if it comes back to me during this one. But let's get started because, well, we want to get this over and done with, don't we? Because we all know what's really coming our way. Everyone's really here. So, first up, WWE 2K21, aka WW, or what was that? WW. That's it, WW. So, we all know that WWE 2K20 was an absolute disaster. It's a technical disaster. It's been panned in so many ways. And it turns out, amidst all the actual corporate restructuring and all, or well, alleged restructuring, basically firing everyone in WWE that's going on at the moment, and coupled with the technical mess that was the game last year, WWE 2K21 is officially cancelled. Now again, no surprise because of how much of a fuck up the whole game was last year. There's no word on if it's going to be back next year and if it's going to resume its annual status. There's no word on if they're going to change developers or whatnot, because one of the reasons that was cited for 2K20 being so bad was that just before launch, like maybe a month or two before launch, the development team was just completely scrapped and it was given to a new studio. So we don't know how that one's going to go. I have no real personal stake or interest in this. It's just more of an interesting development in game development. Development in development. But I will say this, because I also don't care about WWE, but I will say that, interestingly enough, AEW, All Elite Wrestling, have teased being in talks with the company who now has the rights to the old WWF No Mercy tech, development engine, blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. That's interesting to see. I mean, they've just teased it and implied it. There's no AEW game announced. There's no talk of what it could be. Of course, naturally, they're going to want to go big and go strong. I mean, they've really taken off. They were expected to go profitable after something like 3 or 4 years, and they went profitable after something like 6 or 8 months. And they got renewed for several more years in a contract, as well as what's the other one? We're contracted for a second show. So clearly they're doing popular, and that's good. So it's going to be interesting. Will will AEW, whatever they call it, if they do put out a game, will that be the first wrestling game I've bought new in forever? Now, in the interest of, you know what, I'm just going to put it out there just for the sake of it, because I have a general idea, but I can't 100% say. This could potentially, AEW, if they do put out a game, could potentially be the first wrestling game I buy since either WWF No Mercy or Dreamcast WWF Royal Rumble. Now, I'm assuming Dreamcast Royal Rumble is the more recent one because it's on the Dreamcast, which is the next generation up from the N64. So, yeah, we'll see how it goes. And you probably hear my fan kicking up down there as well, because it is hotter than a motherfucker out today. And that means it's hotter than a motherfucker in here. Especially because I've been playing Final Fantasy VII Remake over on my PS4 Pro pretty much most of the day. And that thing is like a fucking space heating jet engine playing that game. Woo, lad. But anyway, we'll grin and bear it, and hopefully it's not too bad. Well, based on the looks of the audio slider and audio scale, it's not going to be too bad. So let's just power on through it, shall we? Next up, Doom Eternal. Funny enough, Doom Eternal is the game that I was told that it would suck to play a first-person shooter with a mouse and keyboard, because you can't do a 360 in one spin. But lol, am I right? Anyway, Doom Eternal. So naturally, Doom Eternal is a great game. It's got much praise for pretty much every aspect. I love it. It's a great game. But interestingly enough, there's one person who's kind of not happy with it to an extent. Now, it's not that he's not happy with the game or the music or anything like that. We'll get into the details now in a second. So, Doom Eternal, the composer, which is Mick Gordon, who's also the composer for Doom 2016, it turns out he's unhappy with part of the final product when it comes to the soundtrack. Now, it's not specifically the in-game soundtrack, even though they should technically be the same. But what happens is Bethesda recently released the soundtrack separately. Yes, I'm trying to talk a bit louder to hopefully drown the fan out, but my God, 13 degrees outside. That's going crazy. That's Ireland. That's Ireland. 13 degrees and I'm dying. It's like summer. Just like my computer is going crazy. Anyway, back to the point here. What was I saying? So, yes, they put out the actual soundtrack for sale separately. Now, it turns out many people were unhappy with the representation of the music and all on the soundtrack, and they were talking to him about it on Twitter and all, and it turns out that he didn't mix the majority of the tracks and they were done without his input and mixed and mastered without his input. That only specifically pertains to the soundtrack versions, the separate soundtrack ones. The ones in game were mixed by him. Like I said, compared to, when you compare to the ones that were mixed in game, it was all done by him, and they're sounding noticeably different. You could listen to the same song on the soundtrack versus the same song in game, and it is noticeably different. So he has expressed his distaste and his dissatisfaction when it comes to Bethesda and ID Software. About, I don't care, anyone can call it id Software, I don't know, it's ID Software to me. It's still ID to me, damn it. But yeah, he's expressed his dissatisfaction with all of that, and he has said that he will probably no longer be working with them in the future if this is the case. And I mean, I can understand it, because music is definitely a form of art, especially when you're the composer and you're creating everything from scratch, and you're doing it based on the feeling and what it emotes from what you're seeing and whatnot, or what you're trying to convey. And this is messing with the original source material, the original representation of the art. Clearly he mixed a song in a specific way for a reason, but then they mix it a different way and it sounds different. I mean, that's not cool if you ask me. So I don't blame him, but it's a shame. Doom Eternal's soundtrack is pretty damn good. Just like Doom 2016. Hell, just like original OG Doom. So let's move away from Doom Eternal and fallouts between soundtrack composers and game mixers and game developers and sound and blah blah blah. Although this kind of does pertain to Doom a little bit because of sales and all, but we're going to look at game sales. Now, we're going to move away from that, but I've always mentioned and maintained that March and April this year was going to be a big rush for games and gamers this year, mainly because you had big releases the likes of Resident Evil 3 Remake, Animal Crossing, Doom Eternal, Trials of Mana, Final Fantasy VII Remake. There's a couple of other small ones in there as well. You could arguably count the Steam release of Borderlands 3 as well as couple of other smaller stuff in there as well. Now, some of these games are obviously bigger than others as well, but naturally it's going to be a lot of money, a lot of game sales overall, and that's the important thing, because, well, this early in the year, yeah, it's a big deal. Typically, you only have maybe one or two games that could launch at this time in the year and would command huge amounts of sales. Now, we have a couple of numbers to throw out there as well. We have Resident Evil 3 Remake, which sold about 2 million copies in 5 days. Unfortunately for Capcom, that was down a little bit from Resident Evil 2 Remake, which sold a little bit more in the same period. But that is to be expected. Resident Evil 2 is overall when you look at the original, I suppose when you look at the remakes as well, Resident Evil 2 is a better game. It's also a more revered game and a more respected game and a more admired game. So people would go with that more. So it makes a bit of sense. Now, they've also got the likes of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, which sold 3.5 million copies in 3 days of its opening weekend. So that would obviously be the Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So 3.5 million units in 3 days is pretty damn good, especially for the likes of Final Fantasy VII. And naturally, again, another one of those games that is legendary, masterpiece, revered status and stage, if you will. But Animal Crossing, of all of the things, has been an absolute juggernaut. And the reason for that is Animal Crossing has obviously sold more units than any other Animal Crossing game at launch. It's become the biggest game in the series several times over. And it's shipped, I shouldn't say shipped, but it has over 5 million digital copies sold in March alone. Not to mention several million physical copies worldwide as well. So, I mean, you're talking 7, 8, 9, 10 million almost. And the game's not even been out. Actually, the game's out just over a month. That's nuts. Now, that's crazy. I mean, that's when you think about it for Animal Crossing. Now, I will say as well, when you look at all of those numbers for Animal Crossing, 3.6 million of those copies alone come straight out of Japan. Now, that's a combination of physical and digital, but it's just crazy in general. When you look at so many other games that don't achieve this level, and not only just don't achieve this level this quick, but don't achieve this level at all. Typically, you've got some of the bigger names, but Animal Crossing, of all things, That's kind of crazy. Now, don't get me wrong, I love Animal Crossing. I have the GameCube one, I have the DS, I have the 3DS, I have the Wii, and now I have the Switch one. But it's just it's kind of crazy. I mean, it's completely destroying Pokemon Sword and Shield, and well, that kind of shows. We'll talk about that now in a moment in the next copy or the next topic, but it really makes sense when you think about it. I mean, the game Animal Crossing is so good that it's already my most played Switch game in what, over 3 years of the Switch being out now. And here we are, about just over a month after launch of Animal Crossing, and it's already overtaken everything else I've played. It's overtaken Pokemon, that's not hard. It's overtaken Luigi's Mansion, again, roughly the same thing. It's overtaken Mario, it's overtaken Zelda, it's overtaken Fire Emblem. So, yeah, it's my number one, and it has no signs of stopping, because it's going to go more and more every day. Patches, updates, whatever it is. So, sales, Animal Crossing, I expected it to be big. I didn't expect this, but we're going to see what it's going to end up by the end of the year. That's going to be big. That's going to be crazy. But when it comes to Nintendo games, Nintendo have recently talked about their own games, the stuff they develop and all too, and specifically they've had comments relating to their games and their development times relative to the quality of the games. And they've said that their games are typically so good and all because their developers and their dev teams and who they have working on their games have all the time they need, and there's not really any rush or any timeline or anything like that they have to hit. Now, this fits in perfectly with the previous segment that we mentioned a moment ago when it comes to Animal Crossing, Animal Crossing's appeal, Animal Crossing just general quality, and of course the sales reflected because of all of this. Now, when it comes to Animal Crossing New Horizons as well, supposedly this went into development shortly after Animal Crossing New Leaf launched on the 3DS back in November of 2012. So the game took like maybe just over 7 years of development. Now, you always take this with a grain of salt. I mean, sure, technically it can go into development that early, but what happens in those times? You know, for the first 2 years, it could just be idea after idea after idea that got completely scrapped and didn't get implemented into the game before they came up with the whole idea of an island and of this, that, and the other. But I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say that the game has been in development for between 7 and 8 years, just for the sake of this little segment we're going to talk about. Now, it does bring up an interesting comparison. It highlights another comparison, especially because when you look at the upcoming Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition, the remastered edition of Xenoblade Chronicles, which is possibly is one of the top 2 best JRPGs of that generation. Possibly that and Lost Odyssey. There might be 1 or 2 other games that's escaping me. Then again, technically, I guess Persona 5 is in that era generation as well, because it did come out on the PS3. But anyway, that's a whole other topic for a whole other conversation. We're not going to worry about that today. But when you look at the visuals and the quality and the scope and scale of that game, it's very impressive by Switch hardware standards. Now, of course, that's only related to other Nintendo games as well, which means overall in the grand scheme and big picture of things, it's not a great looking game, but it does look noticeably better than pretty much every other Switch game. A lot of first party Nintendo games are very, very basic looking, and all the other third party ports are obviously very, very poor looking. But this one, it looks a lot better than pretty much everything else on the console, if you will. But when you look at the quality of Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition on the Switch, and then you compare it to other Nintendo games. Now, I don't care what anyone says. You can like the Breath of the Wild aesthetic. There are clear choices made in that game because it has low quality visuals. You can like the cell shading. I have no problem with cell shading, but there's a reason why it's chosen. It's to cover up many of the technical shortcomings and technical limitations. Again, it looks okay, but it's not something I think about as a decent looking game even in 2017, let alone in 2020. Now, compare it as well, not Zelda, but compare Xenoblade Remastered to, I don't know, let's see, Pokemon Sword and Shield. Remember how basic that game looks. I'm not even talking about those trees, but just the basic game in general. How much of a disaster and how much of a joke it is on a technical standpoint. Not even talking about the quality of the game or the features or anything like that, but just from a technical standpoint. Xenoblade is a big open world game. Pokemon is not. It has much smaller things to worry about. Different areas all at one time, much smaller. Has completely far less things to worry about going on at the same time. And yet, it looks like an early PS3 game. It looks like a basic poor port on a Wii U game. And then you've got Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition, which is originally a Wii game running in standard definition, and then remastered and rejigged and remade and whatnot to what is probably going to be like 720p or 900p or something like that, but to high definition. There's a huge difference. Really highlights the incompetence of Game Freak and, well, basically everything in Pokemon this generation. But moving away from old, obsolete, underpowered hardware to new, modern, futuristic, if you will, versions of powerful hardware. Because we have Intel, and Intel have announced that their 10th generation series chips are going to be coming very soon. They said on an investor call just the other day that they will be released in mid-2020. So there's no date on it just yet, just not even I suppose technically you can guess it's summer, but it's a mid-2020. Now, there are some caveats with this. As great as it is that there is new technology, new generation chips and all, sadly it looks like this version of the Intel 10th generation CPUs, which are running under Tiger Lake architecture, or codename Tiger Lake, are only going to be mobile chips, which are based on their second generation 10 nanometer process, or 10 nanometer plus, depending on how you want to deal with it. But yeah, so far it looks like they're going to be mobile only, so that's just laptops and whatnot too. So this does, interestingly though, I say this is interesting in one way and also completely irrelevant in another, but they're going to be the company's first proper mainstream integrated, I can never pronounce it correctly, we'll call them Z, their XE new integrated GPUs built into these new CPUs. So it's going to be the first proper way they're ever going to take form. Think of combating AMD and their Ryzen APUs and whatnot, which have the AMD, we'll just call it AMD GPU built onto the CPU, so you get the APU that way. So we don't know how this is going to look or perform, or what look in, how the benchmarks are going to look and perform and whatnot too. But I will say that curiously in the same investor call as well, despite the huge surge in AMD sales thanks to Ryzen that accounts for desktop CPUs as well as laptop CPUs, it hasn't put a dent in Intel's profits or market share, despite the percentages increasing on the things like, say, Steam hardware survey and stuff like that. Overall, Intel has still exceeded their first quarter profits by $800 million. So what they forecasted to make, they made, and then another $800 million profit on top of that. So that's, still good for them as well. But sticking with this one only has a quick 1 or 2 second thing to talk about. We also have Nvidia's new stuff. Nvidia announced their new GTC, which was originally delayed from, I can't remember if it was this month or last month. I can't remember when, but it was either delayed from March or April, and now their new GTC is going to be done on May 14th, so that's going to be next month, and that all focuses on the Ampere graphics card line, using the what do they call it now, the Ampere architecture. Now, we have to wait and see if this means consumer level GPUs. Sometimes at these they only talk about the performance and like business and enterprise stuff, so you might just see the likes of Quadros, and you might see AI improvements and deep learning and stuff. But hopefully, at this point I pretty much almost guarantee it, that we will see some new consumer level GPUs. Interestingly enough, I will say we may not see Ampere based consumer level GPUs. They might have a whole separate one that they're just going to drop out of nowhere, like they did with Turing. Everyone was completely, myself included, because of everything we'd seen in the few prior years, we were pretty much 100% guaranteed in our own minds that the next generation stuff was going to be Volta. And then it turned out that Volta was just the like workstation stuff and the Quattro stuff and all. And then out of nowhere they just dropped Touring. And that was the RTX 20 series. So we might have Ampere based consumer level GPUs. We might have something completely new and completely different that can do it as well. But all I know is the sooner they can announce them, the sooner I can start building a computer around them, because I need to go big, hard, and ham when it comes to Cyberpunk. So let's just hope they get announced and they get released and there's no stock issues and that I have all mine and I get it all set up and all before September. Is it September 16th, 14th, 17th, 18th? Let's just say September, just because Cyberpunk anyway. But speaking of PC hardware and top quality amazing hardware that we will completely go in the opposite direction for, and we will go down to, well, console level stuff for the moment, because I want to talk about Final Fantasy VII Remake. Now, despite my little crazy introduction for this one, we're not really going to talk about hardware. I was just bringing it back to the fact that it's timed PS4 exclusive. But I've been playing a significant amount of that. I'm 20 something hours into it now. I'm on chapter 14, I want to say. And two large things come to mind about this game and the future of this game. Now, first off, by the way, I'm loving the game. It's great, despite the massive technical issues because of the consoles. But anyway, how is the rest of this going to be handled? So, before we knew... No, you know what, we'll break it into two different parts here actually as well. Okay, so how is this going to be handled? Obviously this version is on the PS4. By the end of this year, if everything goes to plan, the Xbox and the PS5 are going to be out. And then, of course, we do know that we're going to see PlayStation 4 and Xbox One games still developed for what is probably going to be like maybe 2 to 3 years. Hopefully the sooner they get rid of them, the better. But is the part 2 of this, is it going to be the PS4 version holding it back with all the severe hardware limitations that we already see in this version? Are they going to launch the next version, the part 2, as only a PS4 game? Are they going to launch it as a PS4 game and PS5 game? Or what's the deal? Is there going to be the proper version, a non-technical limitation version? Or are the next, like, maybe 1 or 2 parts we're going to see be crippled, basically, as well? Now, I will say I expect the next version, the part 2 and beyond, to come out as next gen only. Of course, there's easy ways to transfer your save file across from the PS4 to the PS5. So that shouldn't be a problem when carrying over all that stuff. If indeed you can carry your file over, get your benefits and all that stuff too. But the other version, or the other point I want to make here as well is, with how much they expanded Midgar in just this game alone. I mean, when you look at it, they expanded Midgar from and a very, very advanced player like myself could do Midgar in several hours, compared to this one where it's going to be dozens and dozens of hours. Most people are saying that they will clock in around the 40-hour mark. So that's a big, big difference from what you could do Midgar in on the PS1 or the original version, and if you want to use that one. Now, with all the extra stuff, all the extra chapters, the in-between, the filler, however you want to call it, with all of that that's been done just to expand upon Midgar within itself, how many games can we expect to see at this rate? Because it was kind of expected to be maybe 3 different games, but that was before the launch of part 1 and before we knew just how much they expanded and all as well. That's kind of, when you looked at the overall story and scope of the first game, or well, of Final Fantasy VII, the original one, we've pretty much figured, okay, the first game will be Midgar, the second game will be, you know, maybe all of Disc 1 or Disc 1 and part of the way through Disc 2, and then the possibly third game will be the end, be the second half of Disc 2 and Disc 3 as well. But having spent all this time and to see what they're doing, if they could do and expand and just explore, if you will, and put so much extra into Midgar alone, how much are they going to drag out of all the other parts? Lord knows that in the original game, the calm section is kind of legendary for how long and drawn out that one section is. So when you look at the likes of calm, when you look at the likes of, I don't know, Fort Condor, Junon, you've got Costa del Sol, you've got everything on the other side, you've got Nibelheim, you've got Cosmo Canyon, you've got, what is there? You got all the, oh, I forgot the Boneyard place. The excavation town. You've got all that stuff. You've got the revisiting of it all later. Obviously, you've got the North Crater, the City of the Ancients. You've got everything. And then, of course, there's all the extra stuff in Disc 2, and then there's the final in Disc 3, and all the endgame stuff and all as well. How much are they going to fluff that out if they just did so much with Midgar? I mean, are we going to end up with 10 more Final Fantasy VII games over the next 20 years? I don't know, I really hope they don't fluff the rest of the stuff too much, because that might feel a bit of a slap in the face, and it might just drag on a little bit too much. Not to mention that some people will be playing it on like PS7 at that point. Although, you know, that's the beauty of PC. I'll just be able to play all of them on this as one perpetual library and one perpetual system. I won't have to worry about any of the, you know, backwards compatible or keeping all that extra stuff around if I don't really have to. Anyway, let's finish this bad boy up, because we've got one more thing to talk about. It's more of a musing segment and an interesting theory and thoughts on stuff. And then, of course, the best segment that we all want to get to every week. So, in this one, we're going to talk a little bit about live service games. Now, when I say live service games, I'm talking about those always online things that take place only on servers that develop and change over time, the likes of Destiny or The Division 2. There's a bunch of others as well, but once I say those names, you'll understand. Now, I'm not a fan of live service games in general, mainly because you have to be connected to the internet and eventually at some point they will disappear, but as well as the whole design and style that they go through. It's usually a very small, minimal amount of content, and then they will drip feed it to you over the next 6 months, 2 years, 3 years, whatever it is, until the next one comes out. Now, so I'm not a fan of that whole thing in general, but lately I noticed that the live service aspect, or some of the live service aspect at least, has been creeping into non-live service games. Now, some of these, you can look at them, it's not so much as a timed event based on well, I guess you could call it a timed event, but again, these are very limited in some different ways as well, even though they're not live service games. And I am especially not a fan of that. I mean, if I'm playing an offline single-player game, why should I have to worry about all these live service things just to try and force me to play it? Even if I don't do any of this stuff. I mean, Pokemon Sword and Shield comes to mind, even Borderlands 3, or hell, even Animal Crossing, believe it or not, is a big example of all of this. So, the likes of Pokemon Sword and Shield, I mean, you've got the rotating different things from the Super Raids, or Giga Raids, or whatever they're called. EX raids maybe. Again, the game I care so little about at this point because it was such a disappointment. But Borderlands 3 is trying it as well. It's not an online live service game. The content of the base game of Borderlands 3 was great. The 2 proper full DLCs was great. But then you've got all these extra little things they're trying to do. These like loot weeks and stuff. And I guess it's better. It's more incentive if you're going to. It's a positive, if you will. If you're already playing through and going to do all that stuff, and then this is just a bonus on top of it. But it's one of the such small and minor things, really, that it just kind of feels like a live service non-event just to kind of get people to play. But Animal Crossing as well is doing it too. I mean, it's patching it with new stuff to do with the new events that take place every month. Easter, Nature Day, Earth Day, whatever they want to call it in-game, or Bunny Day. But yeah, it's going to keep going like that going forward. Now, of course, I'm always a fan of companies and developers and publishers and all updating their games. But do they have to do it in a limited edition timed upload or update version? Especially if it's a single-player offline game or a non-live service game? yeah, I don't know how I feel about that one, dog. It's more so to hit your fear of missing out almost, and it makes me it makes you want to keep playing. It makes you want to keep coming back again and again and again. But it also makes me wonder where it's going to go and how bad it's going to get eventually when it comes to all of this kind of limited time live service updates in non-live service games. And that has me worried because I'm looking down the future at that one. But anyway, we of course have come to the almost end of our 54th episode of our Quack Experimental Podcast. We are here with our best segment, the reason why everyone is here every week. And you guys, as much as I love you, keep coming back. Because you all want to know what's up, Q, what's going down, what's going on, what's the 411, what's the dealio, what am I playing? Well, like we talked about a second ago, Animal Crossing is still a big one. The new patch has stuff like the Artwing, the Earth Day stuff, has Red and his shadiness and all too. Of course, just today I got the go ahead for the upgrade for Nook's Cranny as well, so that's going to be closed tomorrow, and then I'll have the proper version of it, the fully upgraded one, on Monday, which is going to be nice too. I've been planning out the island and doing what's the word I'm looking for? Horticulture? Is horticulture the word I'm looking for? Architecture as well. I guess I've been laying it out, planning it out. Everything's been coming along nicely. I mean, getting all the other stuff in line, planting all the extra trees, doing these little funky designs, planning out all these extra little parks and little fancy stuff as well. But of course, it all has to come slowly because I do need specific flowers, I need specific ideas, I need stuff to grow, I need to be able to move stuff, which takes real life time. And I will say this, because of trying to get different flowers and different colors and crossbreeding and whatnot, flower crossbreeding fucking sucks. Worst thing ever. I hate it so much. So much. But other than that, it's pretty much just Final Fantasy VII Remake. That's pretty much all I've been playing all week. You know, I did play a little bit of Final Fantasy XIV this week, actually. Believe it or not. I kind of went back and just was leveling Ninja a little bit. But that's beside the point. That's basically on hold now until the next proper patch in summer. But yeah, Final Fantasy VII Remake is the big deal at this point. I'm 20-something hours into it. I'm on to what I believe is Chapter 14. I should have the game finished probably, depending on how long it is. Well, see, people say 40 hours. I'm usually a lot better than most people. I mean, people tell me it took them 150 hours to finish Persona 5. It took me like 102, so I'm better than everyone, as we already know. In fact, you know what? Where are we? There we go. It says it all, really. But, yeah, so I expect it will probably not take me 40 hours, but it would probably take me maybe another 10 to 12 hours. Assuming. Because we all know where Final Fantasy VII, in the original Final Fantasy VII, we know where Midgar ends. We know the key plot points up until there. And I know where I am in the game, and I know that they will probably shoehorn 1 or 2 extra bits in there in the meantime. So I probably have maybe 4 to 5 chapters. We'll go 4 to 6 chapters left. So possibly maybe 12 hours. That's my assumption for it anyway. I'm calling 36. Going to call 36 hours, give or take 30 minutes. We'll see how it goes anyway. But I'm still really enjoying the game, of course. There are some huge technical issues, and there's a few minor annoyances within the game itself, but it's still fantastic in so many different ways. Once I finish that, though, I will be hoping to maybe break up the monotony and just throw in a bit of maybe a retro game at some point. It will probably not be an RPG because I want to have a kind of a palate cleanser in there as well, because Trials of Mana is out, and I want to be moving on to that too as well. Maybe I suppose maybe I could continue Pokemon Black, the only mainline Pokemon generation game I've never completed. Possibly, but you could argue it's an RPG, just not exactly the same thing. And then Gears Tactics is out next week as well, but who knows, maybe I'll 50-50 match Trials of Mana and Gears to kind of break it up, and well, we'll see how it goes. More on that next week, I guess. But yeah, until next week, we are done here with our 54th episode of our Quack Experimental Podcast. As always, I want to thank everyone for shooting the shit and dealing with me through all of this. Lord knows I love the sound of my own voice. Clearly, you guys do as well. After all, why would you still be here? Other than my great opinions, fantastic looks, high production value, and, well, sweet jacket. Am I right? But anyway, in the meantime, feel free to hit up the comment section below with any topic we talked about here today. Depending on what you want to, go for it. If you're salty about something, if you have a question, if you're butthurt about it, if you agree, or if you're just curious, or whatever it is, drop it on in the comment section below. Until then, hit the appropriate button to let me know what I did on the video, and while you're at it, why not head over, hit the subscribe button, and even ring the little notification bell so you can get, hopefully, if YouTube doesn't have anything to say about it anyway, one of these little updates every weekend when one of these beautiful little episodes comes out. Because, you know, we're going strong, and we're showing no signs of stopping down. But in the meantime, remember, winners don't play switch ports.